Let's say that you were on a vacation and the day you returned, you found that your team has made the biggest blunder in the history of your organization. You are to meet the senior leadership in an hour to explain what went wrong and possibly point the one who should take the fall for it. You spend enough time understanding what went wrong and even identify who was responsible for it, and now you are in front of the senior leadership. But when they ask whose fault it was, you take the blame on yourself. The senior leadership is surprised how it could be you since you just returned from your vacation, to which you say, it's your team, and their actions are your accountability, and you are ready to face any consequences that come of it. Now that's extreme. This and many more unconventional actions is what Sriharsha and I discuss in this podcast. So, welcome everyone as we ping pong the principles of extreme ownership and how everyone's potentially a leader. I am your host Vishal Prasad, and this is EnterpriseJoy, educating organizations to be awesome. Welcome everyone to another episode of EnterpriseJoy, and today I have my friend Sriharsha, aka Agile Amigo, with me.
Hi, Vishal. Thank you again for inviting me to this wonderful episode of Enterprise Joy's Extreme Ownership. Of course, you will get into that in more detail, but it's really a great honor for me to be a part of your podcast today. In fact, I also take pride in being in a part of your first episode or
Yeah,
podcast.
the OKRs.
Yeah, the OKRs. So
Yeah.
that kind of set the pace for the journey or the birth of Enterprise Joy. So yeah, I'm really excited, and let's see what we have in store today.
Yeah, that's where it all began with the OKRs. And yes, as you mentioned, the topic is rather extreme ownership. And the first time I heard of this term, I actually thought it's related somewhere to product ownership, but it's not. Like, just for the listeners, we'll explain in a while what it exactly means. But I think that's been a confusion for many people, especially when we hear the term ownership.
Yeah, yeah. So rightly said, extreme ownership. As soon as I heard that term, I come from agile and DevOps background. So extreme ownership for me was something like, okay, we have heard extreme programming. Is it something similar to that? Is it something that you take ownership to the extreme? And all sorts of things were going on in mind until
Mhm.
I kind of got this lovely book that I read through, and more or less I have a good understanding of how things work, what is extreme ownership, and what are those 12 achievement principles that we're going to talk today, Vishal.
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, just for the listeners, so we are going to do this episode slightly differently today, and we'll explain in just a bit of what that's going to be. But before we get into it, let's explain what extreme ownership or where does it come from. So it is basically a philosophy by two people, so Joko Willink and Leif Babin, both of them ex-US Navy SEALs. And what they basically did was created these 12 principles that they learned from the US Navy and drew parallels with organization management. And that's where everything related to leadership behaviors and characteristics evolved. So these 12 principles are like the guiding factor for leadership primarily, but it's taken to an extreme, and that's why extreme ownership, how the leader owns everything for themselves. But yeah, that's kind of a gist. Obviously we'll get into a little bit of detail.
One other point, Vishal.
Mhm.
So, as you rightly said, we're going to run this episode slightly different than your other episodes, where
Yep.
you and I will ping pong these principles between the two of us. And of
Mhm.
course, for our listeners, we really urge you to kind of take these principles and try and fit that in your context and reflect that in how things have worked in your environment. Because obviously, this is not set in stone, and what we both are kind of trying to do is to give you those parallels between extreme ownership in the way it was evolved, and how you can kind of draw parallels to the current setup of your business or organization.
Right, right. Yeah, so again, extreme ownership, just let's introduce it first before we get into the ping pong. So, what is extreme ownership? In very basic terms, it talks about leadership. But when we talk about leadership, and I think we have spoken about this in the past episodes also, leadership does not mean it is only to organization leaders. It's situational leadership. So it is in every part of your organization. And in theory, every individual in the organization is a potential leader. And what extreme ownership spells out is once people stop blaming each other and they take total control of their lives, everything that happens around them is completely for them to manage. Then they basically just go ahead and solve problems, and that's the basic idea of extreme ownership. And if you do believe in this, then you not just become good leaders, but you also become good followers. Considering it's situational leadership, there will be times when you will have to follow. And that's the underlying principle. For being a good leader, you have to be a good follower as well. And that's where these 12 principles, they guide the leadership behavior from every individual.
How rightly said. All these points are really, really important, and especially what stands out for me when we talk about leaders, when we talk about followers, when we talk about actions and those kind of things, are two things. One is humility, and of course, another one is controlling your ego. In one of these principles, again, we will touch upon how you should control your ego as a leader, but just to give you a little taste of that here, as I said, humility or humbleness kind of is really important for somebody like a leader material. And we have a leadership freak. That's how people call him, and his name is Dan Rockwell. And what Dan Rockwell has had come up are five practices of being humble leader. So these five practices, I can possibly list those down. Like, you start bragging about others. Being a leader, it is not just about talking about self. You got to brag about
Yeah.
others, and courageously learn. So that becomes really important, where you courageously learn and set your ego aside and start learning new things, even if you have a subordinate or a team member who is much less experienced than yourselves. You can turn the conversation towards others. As I said, that's not about you, it is about we, it is about the team, right?
Yeah.
So that becomes the most important a trait or a character for a leader. And you got to kind of combine the passionate drive with humility. Now, that is something
Mhm.
which is very deep. And last but not least, you got to be there, raise your hand when it demands for you to take responsibility. Now,
Yep.
these are the five practices where a leader is really stands out from the other folks in the group,
Yeah.
because you are extremely humble. And of course, controlling ego, I can possibly narrate a quick 2-minute story to you guys. As most of you know, I don't know when you're going to listen to this podcast, but I'm sorry that I'm going to spoil your mood, because I'm going to talk about beer. Everybody knows Carlsberg, and when we talk about Carlsberg, it is famous, or it is known for its beer. So we all know, of course, there was a newly appointed CEO of Carlsberg, called Sriharsha. So this person was appointed, and his day one of his office, his admin assistant gave him a key card to access his office space or the floor, and he had a special permission to get into the elevator and go straight into his 20th floor where his office is, and not really stop in any other floors, because he is the CEO, and of course he belonged to that exec level cadre. So what he used to do is to, of course, go straight into floor number 20, and that happened for a few days, and he felt really odd, because he was right at the top, and be it his hierarchy wise, or literally where he was sitting in the building, but all his employees were down below in the lower floors. So what he decided to do was to go down and go to each and every floor, meet his employees, understand what their problems are, and trying to resolve them. So
Mm.
that is when uh, rest other executive team were really surprised by his approach. But what it did was to give a lot of trust between himself and the employees within the organization, because he
Mm.
was there when the employees would needed him badly. So that is the
Right.
quality of a good leader. While you suppress your egos, keep your personal agenda aside, and try and work for them, take that ownership as a leader to resolve their problems. So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
that is something which I wanted to kind of quote as two critical characteristics of a leader.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that is what differentiates like an effective leader from an ineffective leader. And yeah, I think that we'll get to know a bit more about these same things in the extreme ownership principles as well. So let's do one thing, Shri. Why don't you get into the first principle and yeah, explain what it is and where do we start?
Yeah. Okay. So principle one is again apparently the title of the book, extreme ownership. Leaders must own everything in their own space, in their world. When I say that, what it means is, if you're after a mission, now it comes from the Navy SEALs, as Vishal mentioned earlier, which means you have a mission, you have a target to go after. So you got to own everything that falls in that space or in that area, that perimeter, that kind of takes you to that particular target or mission.
Mhm.
So anything and everything will be your responsibility. And extreme ownership is just dead opposite of it's not my job. You
Mhm.
have seen that, I have seen that, many people in the organizations have seen that. It's not my job, it's not mentioned in my job description, I'm not going to do it. Which is a very common statement which we have heard within our colleagues, subordinates, peers, managers, leaders, etc. But
Mhm.
you've got to break that ice and come out of it, break that nutshell and come out of it and say, hey, this is my problem, I'm going to own this, I'm going to take responsibility for the failure. Of course, we will get into more details of it, but
Mhm.
in a nutshell, if we talk about, or in a bird's eye view, if we want to talk about extreme ownership, it is opposite of it's not my job. You got to own that piece, you got to ensure you take responsibilities of failures and start giving those success factors to your team, give them the credit, and start owning the piece until you as a team reach the mission or the target.
Yeah.
That kind of, as per me, is principle number one, which is extreme ownership. Vishal.
Yeah. And I think that's like the big thing also, right? If there are failures, then you basically accept that, hey,
Yeah,
if we failed, then it was my accountability ultimately. So even though my team failed, well, it's still me who has to be held accountable and answerable for it. But yeah.
right.
Have you seen something like this in your experience, Shri?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I was working with a bank about 5 years ago while we were involved in transforming the bank into agile ways of working. So, this bank had a ticketing system. So, they were not into application development as such in their bank. What they used to do is, the application is already out, the solution is already out in the market, and when
Hmm.
people started to uh, you know raise bugs or raise defects, or if they see something is wrong with the product, they start
Hmm.
reporting that to the company, to the organizations, stating, you guys have this, there is a problem here, you got to resolve this.
Hmm.
So this was the pattern, and of course, the team used to, they did not have a process in place, or nobody really kind of took ownership of resolving each and every ticket based on how it had to be. And over a weekend, what happened was a couple of these defects or the tickets, possibly a high priority tickets, slipped through the cracks. And
Hmm.
on a Monday morning, the operations manager, who was the head of the that particular unit, he came up and he found these two were a slip, and it went on to an escalation towards almost to the CEO level of the organization or the bank.
Hmm.
So what this person did was not to point fingers at others to state, okay, why didn't you do this and why didn't you do that. This whole extreme ownership comes into picture, where you stop pointing fingers at others and take the responsibility yourself. That is extreme ownership. So
Yeah.
this is where this person stood there, took the blame for the for the miss, and he laid out a process with the team to ensure they have SLAs tagged to these tickets. So once they had a process in place, what they did was to ensure that everything is happening smooth, and this leader or the operations manager was there all the way to monitor that if everything was going okay for the next few months, and only after which he said, okay, now we have a process, now we are confident that we're not going to miss any of these.
Hmm.
So this was one of the examples which I can really remember from the last 5 years, where this person took extreme ownership of the situation and not starting to kind of point fingers at each other as to why did you not do it. I told you on a Friday evening and I went back home. This
Yeah.
is what you do on a Monday morning. That's not something which we expect.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's courageous to even stand up in front of a like an audience and say, "Hey, it is my mistake." It's not easy, and yeah, I would expect leaders to do that. Yeah, that's the first principle: extreme ownership. Yeah, it was so easy. Just name the first principle, the title of the book, right? Which actually happens again. I'll come to that towards the end. But yeah, the second principle then. So I'll take the second principle from you, Shri. The second
So,
principle says no bad teams, only bad leaders, which sounds so fascinating because now every team member who's listening to this podcast right now can say it is always my tech lead's fault or my team lead's fault or my project manager's fault. Wait for it. That's not how it works. So we said earlier it is situational leadership. So everyone is a leader at some point of time. So it doesn't depend on who has the title, but rather it depends on who's taken command at a particular given point of time and who has the control of the situation. So uh, the idea with this principle is to maintain high standards or high performance in that in some sorts. And the thing with standards it comes is it's not what you preach, but rather it's what you tolerate. And for me especially, I have this one example that I have probably spoken about 100 times to multiple teams and people when it comes to defining quality. When we define quality, that's exactly for me how you define standards. It's not what you preach, it's what you basically tolerate. And I usually have this one example where I ask people, and I've done this on LinkedIn also, and I have got very cute comments after that. So the scenario is, let's say that you are about to go into production. You're going to go live in 2 hours or something, and you suddenly find that there is a paragraph that is misaligned on your web page or an application, whatever you're working on, right? And visually, it is just something that's indented, sorry, but it doesn't change the feature. Everything is perfect. And what do you do in this case? And I usually give multiple options, but the two common options are A, you halt the release, so you
mhm,
don't go ahead with the release, or two, you speak with the product owner. And if the product owner is happy with this minor defect, then you still proceed. So the usual answer is if the product owner is happy because they are the owners of the product
mhm,
and they are the ones who are responsible for maximizing the value. If they give you a go ahead, then we should go and release. And it kind of makes sense that if that is not even aligned to extreme ownership, like the first
mhm.
principle of extreme ownership, one could say
Yeah,
that that is the product owner's call. And they have to be the extreme leader that we are looking for and not the rest of us. But that's not how it works. It's
yeah,
every person on the team. So it doesn't matter whether you are just fresh out of college, second day in your role, and you see this, and even you can keep your foot down and halt the release. That's the kind of extremity that we are talking about. The
yeah,
usual confusion in people's mind is the product owner not the one who takes this call? And the answer is yes, that's not the person who makes this call. So, product owner being a very scrummish term, if we are going through Scrum, the
yeah,
quality of a product is the development team's call. So, the leadership quality that we are looking for when it comes to quality of a product, we don't even need to go to the product owner. It is the development team. And someone has to act as the leader in the development team, hopefully the entire team, to make this call and put their foot down, because ultimately whatever people see in this product is made by these people, so they are keeping their own credibility on the line. So having a misaligned paragraph may still be like a small example which people may ignore, but sometimes I draw parallels with, okay, what about if it's not a misaligned paragraph, but you just purchased a brand new car and it has a scratch? Your car is still
Mm.
going to run, it just has a scratch. Is that acceptable as a product? And that just changes everything in people's mind. And that's where
Yeah.
the second principle basically comes in. When it comes to standards, it's not what you preach but what you tolerate, and everything that you give away as that's okay or that's fine and we can proceed, that actually reduces your tolerance every time. And that's where your standards keep on reducing. So one has to put in that additional effort to actually keep the high standards in a team. And that's the reason why we say there are no bad teams, only bad leaders, because potentially everyone is one.
Yeah.
And that's basically principle two. And this principle is was actually pretty amazing for me to read, because it kind of resonated with me on multiple occasions. But yeah, this just means that, hey, we should just stop calling people as like developers or testers or something else. We should just call everyone leaders, because that's what they are. At least that's what they're supposed to be.
Absolutely. No,
Yeah,
I
so
totally
that's,
agree.
yeah, that's two principles down so far.
Yeah.
So let's continue with the ping pong. Shri, why don't you take principle number three?
Well, you actually have nicely landed this whole thing for us to start principle number three, which talks more about believing. As a leader, what you need to do before you actually start preaching, you got to believe in the mission, or the target, or the
Mhm.
vision of the organization, if I may call it. Only then you will kind of gain that confidence to go back to your teams and talk the language of
Mhm.
the organization. Otherwise, you possibly will be waiting for the command from the higher ups, and what you do is to the again percolate it down to your team and wash your hands off. That is
Yeah.
not a leader what we all want. What we need is, we need to believe truly that this is going to work, and that's the same attitude that we're going to get down to our folks as well, so that they believe in what they do. As one of the other renowned leadership speaker, Simon Sinek, he
Mhm.
has said there are two ways to influence human behavior. One is you inspire it, or you manipulate it. It is up to us to choose what. If you are an effective leader, you got to inspire the human behavior in order to for them to imbibe that and start believing in what they do. The team should believe in what they do, only then. So if I want to bring that in the context of again organizations, in doing sprints, or scrum ways of working,
Mhm.
whatever you as a development team will start playing in your sprint or in the time box duration, you got to believe that yes, this will be a value add. Just because a product
Yeah.
owner tells you that this will fetch me a return of investment, go ahead and do it. That will be more like a command and control. We don't want that. What we want is, I believe, yes, task number 1, 2, 3, or whatever the feature number 1, 2, 3 is going to fetch return of investment or provides business value to your customers.
Yeah.
Only then you will be able to work using all your scrum values, like your focus, commitment, and all sorts of things which you can possibly deep down. But at the moment, what I would like to kind of quote is, these especially the believe term really ties well with agile principles, your agile 12 principles. Again, number
Mhm.
5, if I can be very specific, what it says is to give your team the support, and most importantly, trust the team that the work is going to be done. How will you
Yeah.
trust the team? The trust is going to come only when you believe in them. It is not just about the leadership believing in the team. It's both ways, top
Yeah.
down and bottom up. Both have to have that important thing called belief, and that's where trust comes in. That's where focus comes in, commitment comes in, and that's where
Mhm.
delivery of your value comes in place. So
Yeah.
this possibly is principle number 3, if I can kind of wrap this up as a principle,
Yeah. And
Vishal.
yeah, I think you mentioned pretty well. So when we speak about commitment, and I was happy when they changed the term in the Scrum Guide, right, from
Yeah,
commitment to a forecast, because commitment is more like a belief that hey, we are all working towards a goal, whereas it's not just about okay, these are the items that we have selected in a particular iteration, and that's what we are going to complete. That's not what it is. So yeah,
yeah,
it's basically the belief. So that's principle number 3. Absolutely right.
that's right. Yeah,
Which brings me to principle number 4, and something that you mentioned in the introduction, which is check the ego. Check the ego. And wow, this is so easy for me to explain. Not really, but it's keeping your personal agenda aside and making your team's mission your personal mission. And that's where the entire idea of keeping your ego in check can evolve from. And one of the places where this kind of fosters in a lot of organizations, I think it pretty much starts during the recruitment. So if I'm recruiting someone for a particular job, one of the usual things in the job description is a few number of years of experience that this person has. Now, I'm not denying that you need a specific amount of skills in order to perform a particular job. Absolutely, that is what you need. The place where it becomes slightly like a blanket statement for me is to say anyone less than a particular number of years is not even skilled enough to be there. And this kind of like trickles down when it comes to, let's say, if you're in meetings in an organization that kind of fosters on this kind of behavior, you get something like a hippo. A
mm,
hippo is the highest paid person in the room, and their
yeah,
opinion is the only one that counts, which is not something that we want, especially when it comes to extreme ownership. That's definitely not what we want. But if you actually go to see, as new generation starts working, the amount of information and the amount of uh, experiences that's available for them to look for, maybe they are just at par with the ones who are already there. So an example being someone who's 15 years of experience versus someone who's 10 years of experience, probably the skill set is at the exact same level.
yeah,
Not because the one 10 years is smarter, but just because they just came 5 years later, which means they had 5 years of this knowledge that they got without even being there. And partly that also means they still have 5 years to learn more and experience things which are more hands on, which the person of 15 years will not really get to do because they are no longer doing things hands on. So it's actually better for the ones who are lesser experienced. They probably know much more. And it
yeah,
becomes important for leaders to actually reach out to them and get their views or allow them or give them the freedom to run things their way. That's where the entire leadership aspect comes in, and checking your ego becomes important. And
absolutely.
honestly, I've seen that happen in the recent past also. So Shantanu Naidu, if you have heard of him,
Yeah,
uh, he's still in his late 20s, I think.
mhm,
He is the investment advisor, like the startup investment advisor for Ratan Tata, who's like a baby boomer. Okay. I mean, there might be some reason why a billionaire investor is putting all of his hopes or all of his trust in this individual who has not even reached his 30s. And that's basically keeping your ego in check. You cannot believe the places where you can find leadership and the skills and the qualities that you're looking for. And yeah, it's just amazing to see how all of this ties back to just extreme ownership, and that is to just keep an eye for the bigger goal and keep your personal agenda aside.
well, when Ratan Tata can do it, anybody can do it, isn't it? uh,
Absolutely, I have tremendous
the
respect
only
for that fellow, and
yeah,
he's amazing.
absolutely, absolutely. In fact, as I was telling you on Dan Rockwell's one of those practices of humble leadership, there
Mhm.
again we talked about or touched about courageously learn, which really ties well with this ego factor. Because if you're not courageous to approach a person who's less than 30 years old and say, hey, I need your help, I need your suggestions in me investing into this new business. If I don't go there, we always have that wall in between, saying he probably will not come in because he thinks that I know everything because I'm
Yeah.
the senior member of the family here. So
Mhm.
I will have to continuously and courageously start learning, which means I will have to go to him and keep my personal agenda aside, as you rightly pointed out. I think that really kind of stitches well with what you just now said in terms of
Yeah.
ego.
Yeah. In fact, there are so many times that I've heard leaders, when I say leaders, like people who have been in an organization for some time now,
Mhm.
who say, man, the older times were great. Like in the good old days, we had this and that and blah, blah, blah. No, the good old days were never good. Very honestly, every single day is better than the one before. But here's the thing, and this is the way I look at it. We live in a world of entropy. So things are constantly moving towards randomness. And moving towards randomness can also be considered as what we spoke about in principle number 2. It can mean that your standards are falling, possibly, which means these the folks who have been in an organization longer and who probably say that the olden times are better,
Mhm.
yeah, that's pretty much breaking principle 1 of extreme ownership. You cannot blame others for ruining your current times. You just have yourself to blame, because it's your job to keep the entropy in check. It's your job to ensure that the people who are coming in now, they maintain the high standards that you have had in your mind since so many years.
Mhm.
So it's not them who probably have ruined things, it's probably you yourself. And that's why I
Yeah.
say every single day is better than the previous day, as long as every single day I am doing something that ensures that the ones after me are also maintaining. And that's my job. And that's why, yeah, it's the additional effort that I have to put in, instead of just saying that the good old days were good. No, the good old days were not good. I mean, we don't live in Stone Age anymore. Come on.
No, I really like the conversation the way it's been happening, because what we are essentially, I really like the line which you said, today is better than the previous day. Tomorrow possibly will be better than today. So,
Yeah,
which means what you're essentially doing is you're continuously improving, which we uh,
exactly.
harp about day in, day out in our agile coaching sessions or whatever the case may be in our work lives. But here, what you said just now is even within your own personal lives, if you actually start believing in these, your egos will automatically go to a side, and what you can actually focus in your own success professionally and personally as well.
Absolutely. But okay, so we are down four goals, four
Uh-huh.
principles. Let's do one thing. Let's take a short break. And when we come back, we continue. We will take a look at the next four principles, and let's see what we have to find out new in that. All right?
Fantastic.
Okay,
Brilliant.
so listeners, stay tuned. We'll be back in just a minute. Hey, it's time to give a Patreon shout out to the following Patreon patrons: Sebastian Holscher and David Taborek. Thank you so much for all your support in our quest to help build awesome organizations. We could not do it without you. And for those of you wondering how you might get your own Patreon shout out, well, become our patron on patreon.com/enterprisejoy and support us. Okay, welcome back everyone. With me, Sriharsha, my agile amigo, and we have been discussing extreme ownership. So far, we have discussed four principles, and now we are moving to principle number 5. So principle number 5, over to you, Sri.
Okay, thanks, Vishal. Let's move on to principle number 5, which is cover and move. Simply put, teamwork, collaboration. So here again, let me go back into the history of how this principle came up as cover and move. And we were talking about Navy SEALs, right? So two teams in Iraq were in a combat situation, and one was deep into the army territory, which was fairly far away from their base, home base, and another team was right up the tower nearby to their home base. So there are
Mhm.
two teams who are situated outside, and they want to return to their base. So this is the situation where the team number one, which is there right into the enemy territory, they did kind of used cover and move, and they head back home, or to their home base, and they were extremely happy that they achieved their particular effort of coming back to their base.
Mhm.
However, their superiors were not really happy, and
Mhm.
because the superiors said, you guys did not work in collaboration with team number two. Team number two was at your disposal in order to protect you. So what you could have done is have a sniper, focusing on enemies while you guys are making your move inside. So this would have been a great collaboration, and cover and move comes from there. Now, if I will have to bring that to our business scenario, we may have taken up work items that possibly are not just into your team's boundaries. It can possibly fall out of your team's boundaries in order for you to deliver something which you have forecasted, right?
Mhm.
So in this case, we as a team, or we as leaders, should imbibe this into your team's mind, saying it is not just four or five of us who are delivering a particular product is a team. We have dependencies on external teams within the organization, and we will have to consider them as our team. So when we have this oneness, when we consider we all are one and we go as a team, that's
Mhm.
when your collaboration will be effective, your communication will be effective, and that mindset should be imbibed into each and every person's mind by a leader. So that is where we again talk about extreme ownership, cover and move, which is simply put as teamwork
Mhm.
or collaboration.
Yeah.
So that's kind of end of principle number 5. Vishal, any thoughts from your side on this?
I think that's where we also tend to define the responsibilities and accountabilities very clearly, right? So you know who you have to reach out to, you know who's the one who's in charge at a particular point of time, and that's how the everything starts getting shaped up. So yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
Okay, so principle 5, cover and move. Principle 6 actually is my favorite, and it's called simple. Right, keeping it simple. And this actually is my favorite because it's also aligned with the manifesto principle, agile manifesto principle, which says simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential. And basically is to reduce waste and keep your communication and plan extremely clear, precise, and simple, so that it's easy for others to follow. And obviously, the plans can come from anyone, but the rule still remains that it has to be simple. And one of the examples I usually use to get this across to people is, uh, especially if you're working as a vendor for someone. Okay, so I work with software developers. I build software products. So especially if you're working with vendors, and let's say that a bug is found in production. Right? Now, a bug can be a bug as in logical problem, or it can just be a missing requirement. But that's usually the first step that many of the teams will do, especially when you have vendors involved, as to have this triage between teams to identify if it's a bug or it's a change request, as in a missing requirement. And one of the essential reasons why it's to be done is you get paid for one, you don't get paid for the other. So that actually is a lot of waste in my head, because you're the amount of time we spend in discussing this, the poor user is still waiting for a solution. That is so wrong. But in my head, if I want to resolve this problem, the simplest thing is not when the bug is identified. It's actually much earlier than that. So most of the teams that I've worked with, they work in iterations, and during iterations, they have planning. So they plan for an iteration. And what I've usually seen is that a lot of teams will plan what has to be done in an iteration, but they do not decide how it has to be done in an iteration. And the ones who do decide how it's to be done, it's pretty much aligned or restricted to the design of the code or the architecture or something of that sort. And many teams miss out the acceptance point of it. And I'm not talking about acceptance criteria. That's still
No.
something that many people utilize. It's more of tests, the tests that fulfill a certain requirement. So the simplicity point of view, since we are talking about extreme ownership, there's also extreme programming, which I love. uh, the rule says that during your planning, identify as many tests as possible which fulfill a particular requirement. So, in an ideal case, if you have identified all the tests that fulfill a requirement and you have written code that fulfills all of them and it's gone into production, any bug that then arises out of this application in production is basically a missing test. So there is no discussion whether it's a bug or a change request. It's simply a missing test. We never identified it, it never went into the system. And that simply has to come back. A test is designed for it, or multiple tests are designed for it, and it goes back into production. This simple rule of identifying tests that gets rid of all of that unnecessary discussions of whether this is a bug or a CR and all the triage and all the wastage that happens in discussions. And that's where extreme ownership comes in. When we spoke about the first principle, extreme ownership, this is so wrong because the moment a bug is coming, we are trying to point fingers as to whether this is a problem or not. Whereas extreme ownership says, yes, this is a problem, this is a missing test. So let's go back to our drawing board, fix the test, and get it out into production again. That's extreme ownership. And the crazy
Sure.
thing about this example is there's no manager involved over here. This is all pure development team that's doing this job. And that's why I love this principle. This is my favorite, not just in extreme ownership, but anywhere where I hear the KISS phenomenon, like keep it simple, stupid
Yeah.
kind of a thing. This is probably my best principle ever. I'm so happy wherever I read this.
Well, that kind of ties well with the self-organizing what we talk about in
Yeah,
agile environment, isn't it? The
absolutely,
manager is
absolutely.
not involved, as you rightly said. Everything happens within the team, and they take control of the situation. They will be leaders by themselves. They don't need somebody else sitting on top of them stating what needs to be done.
Yeah,
So that is exactly what you and I are kind of making an effort today to help people understand or realize, or that light bulb moment is what we call, to state everyone is a leader. I am a leader, you are a leader, everybody is a leader. So
yeah,
it's just a matter of empowering yourselves and making those decisions, which we will kind of come back to it at some point. But yeah, great example given, Vishal.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that's principle 6.
Uh-huh.
Principle 7 for you, Shri.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So next we have is principle number 7, which is prioritize and execute, right? So an effective way to kind of implement this principle would be always to plan a few steps ahead. I'll come to the plan in detail, but if I'll have to talk about this particular principle with respect to extreme ownership, how many of us have been swarmed with tasks on a daily basis? How
Mhm.
many of us are kind of submerged in our emails and inboxes that we fail to prioritize our work? Everybody, you, me, everybody will have this problem. Any leader, anybody will have many tasks to perform, many responsibilities to take care or to cater to. So the principle really says that you got to prioritize the work and then work on it. So I'd highly recommend one of these Eisenhower's urgent important metrics.
Yeah,
I don't know
yeah.
if you have heard this. Yeah. So this was originally laid out by him, Eisenhower, where the metrics talks about. I mean, it is laid out as 4 quadrants where they
Mhm.
talk about urgent important, not urgent but important, urgent but not really important, not urgent and not important. So these are the 4 quadrants in that. So you can do it in your personal lives, in your work, wherever you want to. You can imply this particular metrics and see how miraculously your prioritization and working will change.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think if I'm
yeah,
not wrong, the idea of that quadrant is to stay in the not urgent but important place as much as possible so that you can always plan that 2 steps ahead thing that you
indeed.
spoke about.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the kind of the result or the outcome or the objective of this whole metrics, where
Mm.
the first quadrant, when we talked about urgent and important, you got to do it. That's it,
There's
because
no
it is
choice. Yeah,
urgent and
it's there.
important. There's no choice. You're
Yeah.
right. And when we talk about not so urgent but important, well, I can plan to do it at some point. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when it comes to urgent but not important, I'd rather delegate. I'll not waste my time, because I know it is urgent but I know it is not important for me at the moment.
Mhm.
And the last quadrant, but definitely not the least here, because it's not urgent, not important, which is fine. If that is the case, why is it in there still? So I could
Yeah.
eliminate possibly those tasks.
Yeah, but there
So
are times when
yeah,
these move, right? So they move from one quadrant to another.
they
So
move.
something that is not important, not urgent, but important, it will soon become urgent and
Can.
important.
Yeah.
But then, if you have planned about it ahead, then you know what you
Yes.
have to do when the situation comes in.
Very rightly said. Yes, this keep the tasks can keep moving across these four quadrants, but
Yeah.
what is important is how you see it, where it has to really go and sit there, and accordingly you do, or you plan, you delegate, or you eliminate these tasks.
Mm.
So this is one way which I do in my personal life, and see how best I can prioritize and execute the task. So this is again, it's an extreme. How does this relate to extreme ownership? Is again, basically, to understand, first thing and the foremost thing for a leader is to prioritize his or her tasks and then start executing them, because everybody is overwhelmed, with this particular tasks on a daily basis. So you got to relax, you got to look around, you got to assess the situation and make a call. So
Mm.
this is something which principle number 7 talks about, and that's prioritize and execute for us.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense, and I can totally relate to that quadrant. In fact, for me also, I think just last week or the week before that, I decluttered my calendar. So I just went in and I declined loads of things over there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I totally agree with it. Okay, with that, we come to principle number 8. And principle number 8 is decentralized command. And we did speak about this in brief in the other principles also. This is about identifying who's the uh, right leader in a particular situation, and then give them the control to do their thing. So if I want to relate this again to the product aspect of it, we have the product owner who takes the lead to identify what set of features I may want to do next, because I have a better vision of the marketplace and the stakeholders and what is it that brings in value. But the moment I come to the actual development, it is the development team that takes charge of how something is going to be built, and there the product owner simply goes with their judgment. And that's the idea of decentralized command. However, when it comes to decentralized command, it becomes important when this command is flowing from one party to another. It has to be simple, clear. The communication has to be unambiguous, and that is how things basically proceed. So the two principles then get connected between simple and decentralized command. I think this is where we briefly touched upon self organization. This is where self organization actually comes in. So leaders are the best suited to identify where they need to move in a particular situation. So they decide where they have to be, and they decide what they are supposed to do and how they are supposed to do it. And if needed, and if they are okay with it, they may also become cross functional as an individual. I know we usually want cross functionality on a team level, but it's more or less the individual's call of how they want to do it. So self organization for sure, but cross functionality at some level may also become one of the aspects of it. And that's where the agility comes in. It's this navigation in the uncertainty with the help of decentralized command. That's how we achieve goals. So
Yeah.
if the team is aligned towards one common goal, then the principle of teamwork, that is cover and move, also come into picture. You have provided the goal, which is simple and clear, and then you have decentralized command to actually achieve that. So all of this just comes together to reach one particular mission or complete one particular mission. So yeah, that's decentralized command. Principle
This
number
the
8.
kind of sorry, this kind of puts your micromanagement at rest, isn't it? The way you said, the
Yeah.
decentralizing command is, of course, it all ties well with cover and move and being clear of what your objectives are and those kind of things, which I will come in and talk about in principle number 9, where we give a clear directive to the team,
Hmm.
etc. But when you have that, and when you have them organized, them taking that authority to make the decision,
Yeah.
what you're essentially doing is cutting off that micromanagement bit from your,
Yeah.
say, project manager or anybody sitting on your throat and asking you to finish X, Y, and Z on a daily basis, or possibly even work weekends,
Mm.
because you will have to go on a waterfallish plan and try and deliver something. All these things can be put to rest, if the this particular decentralizing command works very well within the team, or even perhaps the organization.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think one of the things that managers need to understand is they don't need to be there all the time in order for things to get accomplished. In fact, a lot of the times they just need to get away from their teams in order to leave the team alone to achieve their goals. And I think that constant interruption is something that actually hampers the entire productivity compared to, let's say, just leaving them alone.
Which seldom
Leaving them
happens,
alone just brings
unfortunately.
focus. Sorry.
I said which seldom happens, unfortunately, these days.
Well, uh,
Even if agile comes into picture, there are some managers who will expect you to send out weekly status reports and be on top of
I,
your throat
I
all
was
the
just
time.
discussing with a friend yesterday
Uh-huh.
about why do we have these so many trainings about working remotely. I mean, what's this grand idea of working remotely that you have to be trained on?
Yeah,
And one of the things she said is the problem usually is not that people need help to understand how to work remotely. It's for the managers to understand that they don't need to see people all the time that they are working or not. And the training of how to work effectively in a remote setup is rarely about which tools you want to use and how you want to collaborate. It's mostly about how to keep, how to leave people alone so
yeah,
that they can accomplish what they're supposed to. And that
very
was
true.
like an eye opener for me. I was having that conversation just last night. And yeah, that's because we have seen the remote trainings coming up so often now. It just makes me question, is it that difficult that everyone is going through it? I mean, come on. Haven't we have been doing this for some time now. But anyway, so that's principle number 8,
Yeah,
decentralized command. And with that, I think we should take a break. And when we come back, we'll enter the last segment and the last 4 principles. And then we'll see the complete picture of what we call extreme ownership. Right. So
absolutely.
let's take a break and we'll be back.
Thanks, Vishal.
If you like what you're hearing, then do subscribe to this podcast for more of Enterprise Joy. You can get a complete list of platforms where this podcast is available on anchor.fm/enterprisejoy or on our website enterprisejoy.com. Folks who prefer more visual experience can save the Enterprise Joy podcast playlist on YouTube. And you can also support this podcast by becoming a patron on patreon.com/enterprisejoy. We are happy to bring great content for you that can help you and your organization be more awesome. All right, welcome back, everyone. With me, Sriharsha, and we have been speaking about extreme ownership. So far, 8 principles down, 4 more to go. And I go back to Sri, principle number 9 for you.
Sure. Principle number 9, which is plan. Well, we all know, of course, at least in the agile world, the manifesto itself talks about keep your planning to very minimal. And they have never said us to kind of, okay, because it's agile, you can throw the planning away. No, that's not the case. I mean, why I wanted to bring that up is plan still is a very important aspect of extreme ownership. Now, when we say that, as a leader, providing clear directives to the team becomes extremely important as a leader. So
Mhm.
it is easier said than done. I agree. I put my hand up and I say it is easy said than done. It is very difficult to implement. When we talk about ideation to MVP, we have heard that phrase, ideation to MVP, when the idea comes in and that forms a vision and that forms an epic. And we all know that how the requirement hierarchy flows down. But without a clear directive to proceed towards a direction, and as our great Mahatma Gandhi has himself said, speed is good, but only in the right direction. Otherwise, speed is not speed, right?
Right.
So, likewise, without a clear directive to proceed, uh, the phrase holds no value. The ideation to MVP holds no value. So, which means it can happen in many levels. Now, again, coming back to you know classic example of providing a clear directive is to introduce your teams to the right uh, objectives and key results within the organization. And of course, with all the previous principles in place, you got to believe that this is the objective that's going to work for us. This is the objective that's going to take our organization to a different level. So once you start believing in this, you're going to talk to your team as a leader and start introducing your teams to the right OKRs or objectives and key results. Now, it is a popular, we all know it is a popular management strategy, the OKRs, for goal setting within your organizations. But what it essentially does is to give you a plan. You may not be 100% plan. Upfront planning is really not required, but what we need is a just enough plan for us to go ahead. And obviously we all know about seeking feedback and inspecting and adapting to those feedback and elaborate, possibly have a comprehensive plan as and when you uncover stuff, as and when you surface a few issues that you encounter. But
Mhm.
bottom line, your plan is required, and which means it gives a clear directive to your team in understanding which direction they are proceeding towards, and is that the right direction or no.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't strive for perfection. Like perfection will eventually come, but whatever you know, like keep moving. That's more important. Don't stagnate, and that's the whole idea of a plan. And yeah, the OKRs thing that we did in the first podcast itself, that kind of uh, does this alignment in a pretty nice way. So you have like
Oh
this
yes.
organization from the top till the teams that give you a clear way of aligning in which direction everyone has to move. So
True.
maybe not a detailed plan, but still a direction. So
Yeah.
moving somewhere is always important. So yeah, I think planning is, and also plans may change. Regular planning is something that's more important. So keep on inspecting and adapting and keep on seeing how things proceed. Absolutely. Okay, with that, we come to principle number 10. Principle number 10 is leading up and down the chain of command. Now, this is a heavy one. Okay, and I'll possibly try my best to explain this because people might get freaked out with this one. So it says your most, or rather a leader's, one of the most important jobs of a leader is to support their immediate leadership. That would mean that things like disagreeing with them in public may be catastrophic to actually the entire image of leadership that one wants to set. So that's not to say that disagreements should not happen, but the way disagreements should happen, especially with the command chain upwards, it has to be more cautious and it has to be more respectful. And that's not to say that I have to treat someone like a father figure. It's more to say how you proceed in that direction. For example, if you're expecting your leaders to make a decision but they are not able to make timely decisions, instead of blaming the leader as to not doing their job well, possibly look inside as to what can you do in order to support your leader to make timely decisions. And that's what this basically means. So before uh, kind of saying that, hey, you're not doing the thing that you're supposed to do, ask, what is it that I can do so that you can do what you're supposed to do? That kind of a thing. And yeah, the arguments will always happen. It's not to say that. I mean, that's how conflicts are necessary in order to grow. But the way it is done, ultimately, once a decision has been taken, the final decision has been taken, then it becomes a leader's job just to follow it and ensure that the messaging goes in the same way down the command chain. And I have a good example for this one. So I primarily work as a business analyst, and a good part of my job is to work alongside product owners and client stakeholders or user representatives. And we usually have workshops, right? And in workshops, we brainstorm on a number of features or things that we have to develop in the future. And there will be times when I will disagree with certain aspects that my product owner wants out of the product. So let's say I may support one of the stakeholders, but the product owner may not support that stakeholder. And that's where the prioritization in both of our heads will be different. However, once the workshop is done and we are out of the workshop, and then it is the job of the product owner to ultimately decide uh, which priority we have to proceed with. It's all their decision. I mean, I will particularly just follow their decision. That's extreme about leading up up towards the chain of command.
So I just had a question on that, or rather, my point of view. If we say leading up and down the chain of command, right,
Mhm.
as an extreme ownership principle number 10, um, I totally understand your views there. But when we talked about uh, having an informed decision, and once the decision is made, we just need to, execute the plan the way the decision is flown down from top to bottom. Now, when we talk about the agile ways of working, where we keep endorsing, getting the kind of transfer of power or empowering our teams rather than just having it at the command and control level, don't you think this principle kind of acts as a counterproductive to agile ways of working? What's your take on that?
So, not really. I know that the name can be, like, the title can be misleading because it says moving up and
Mm,
down the chain of command. The chain of command need not be a hierarchy. Now, obviously,
okay.
if you come from the US Navy SEALs point of view, yes, it is a
Mm,
hierarchy.
mm,
Hierarchy need not be bad. I mean, hierarchy also helps with certain kind of standardization that many organizations would need. So if we go
mm,
back to the reinventing organization aspect of moving from different colors of organizations, yes, there
mm,
are still some organizations who fit the context. But this is not talking about hierarchy. The talk about moving up and down the chain of command is any situational leader will have someone who has people who he has to or she has to provide the information, and people from whom they will be taking the information. And this connection is basically the chain of command up and down. So a place
okay.
from where you are getting information and the place where you are providing information, and you are somewhere in the middle. And
Got
that's, so it sounds very hierarchical, I understand, but it actually is where you are, from where you're getting your information and where the information is going out. The only reason why the cautious and respectful thing we are talking about when we go up the chain of command is because the place from where you're receiving information, they
mhm.
possibly have a much bigger picture than you have.
Yeah,
So it makes sense to reach out to them and get a clearer picture before you proceed.
yeah.
So yeah,
No, it
it's
all
not,
makes sense now.
still not a hierarchy. I mean, it
Yeah,
can be depending on your organization,
yeah.
but the principle is not necessary to enforce hierarchy. That's not what it is.
Got it. Yeah. No, that becomes very important, isn't it? Rather than just a top-down kind of a hierarchical structure, which we want to move away from.
Yeah.
But yeah, what you said, right, is rightly said. I think it kind of decrypts those aspects, and not just about talking about hierarchy from top down or whatever that is,
Yeah.
but it's more on the source of information and stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, no, I like
But
the
but
answer.
this
Thank you.
is this is a very common question, because, and that's why initially I said that just talking about this particular principle, it's a little heavy because it may not be taken in the best possible way. It feels very much
Yeah.
like I'm there to take orders. It's not really the same. You have to think of how situationally it fits your purpose.
Easy for a misinterpretation there.
Very easy. Very
Yeah.
anti-agile, if you want to put it that way.
I was in that mode last 5 minutes ago, but I think I've got my doubt cleared now.
Okay, cool. So, all right. Principle 11, up to you.
Absolutely. Okay, so principle 11 of extreme ownership talks about decisiveness amidst uncertainty. I mean, we all know a strong leader is always decisive in terms of um, we all know what is there in the future is only these four things which we talk about: the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. More so now with all the COVID and stuff coming in, there's a lot of confusion, a lot of uncertainty around the world, or within your organization, within your personal lives, etc. But what this principle literally says is the ability to take decisions during these kind of situations, during this chaos, is a key and an important trait or a character of an effective leader. Well, by now we would have realized that leaders are not just about managers or anybody higher up the hierarchical chain. It is everybody. You are a leader, I am a leader. Everybody, whoever is working towards a mission, is effectively a leader. Now, when I'm saying this, I'm also saying it becomes important for us as leaders to take that decision, whether it's in a team level and whether it's in an organizational level, project level, program level, CXO level, wherever that is. Now, just a little classic example which I can give you to help you understand principle number 11 is your sprint number 0. I know sprint 0 is not something which exists
Mm,
in Scrum Guide, and yeah, but sprint 0 is where we talk about a lot of stakeholder buy-ins. We talk about budgeting, we talk about formation of teams, we talk about the vision backlog, where we get the vision from the organization and start decomposing those into chunks, and decompose those into finer bits. So this phase is again like an umbrella term called sprint 0, which doesn't really exist, but many people will continue to have this initial phase or initiation phase for a long time, because they are not confident of making a decision to give it a start. Now, this a everybody would have gone through this particular situation where no, we are still trying to get the stakeholder buy. No, we are still trying to finalize the design. No, we are still trying to get the budget approval, etc. Of course,
the
budget
user
approval.
research is not completed yet. I mean, the user research is not yet
Yeah,
completed, and we
user
still,
research. Yeah,
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 you're
and we,
right. Yeah, you're right. So yeah, all these factors come into picture, and we fail to take those important decisions. Now, what they, especially in Principle 11, the objective is to start taking decisions. If you want 100% environment to work, you will not gonna get it. So come to come to the terms, to reality, rather than just hiding under the excuse that nothing is ready, so I'm not going to make a start. Why don't you make a start when you have just enough requirements, just enough design to begin your sprints in case of Scrum, and start progressing and be pragmatic. And as and when you be pragmatic, you can incrementally build onto your product. And at least what you're essentially doing is to bring your customer in terms of collaboration. We did talk about collaboration, communication, etc. for the last hour or so. What we are essentially doing is to get your customers buy-in as and when you progress through the journey. You say, hey customer, you wanted say a product, but I'm giving you a working product or a chunk of it. Am I heading in the right direction? If am I heading in the right direction? If not, I let me take your feedback, and once I take your feedback,
mhm,
I'll start implementing on that, and I'll go on. But what
right,
was important? Making a decision was important.
right,
So this was principle number 11.
yeah. And I mean, if it's still okay if it's the wrong decision,
Yeah,
but taking continuous decisions and moving on is the whole point. Yeah,
absolutely.
make a decision, move on. If it's wrong, pivot. That's okay, but
Yeah.
keep on moving. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it
You
relates
fail
very
fast,
well
right?
to. Sorry.
You fail fast, right?
Yeah, you
What's
fail fast.
maximum going to happen? You're going to fail, but what you're going to do is to fail fast so that you get more opportunity to improve on.
Yeah, or as I like to call it, you learn to fail, not
There you go.
learn from failure. You need to learn to fail in order to move. But this ties back very well to the plan principle as well, right? Because the planning is also to keep you moving, and uh, this one is also to make decisions and keep on moving. So yeah, it
Progress.
kind of
Yep.
ties beautifully.
Yep.
Okay, and that brings us to the final principle of the day, which is principle number 12. And I think when we started off the discussion, I mentioned that extreme ownership, like the first principle, you named that as the title of the book.
Mm.
Dichotomy of Leadership, which is principle 12, is the second book by the same two gentlemen, which talks about the dichotomy of leadership. And there are like a number of things uh, that get covered in this one. So I don't remember all of the points which is mentioned over here. I do remember a few. So one of the things that we already discussed, right? A good leader is also a good follower, and that's like a dichotomy that you are a good leader at the same time you're a good follower. Similarly, good leaders are not intimidated by someone else doing something better or taking charge. So they are
Mm.
not worried about someone outshining them, for example.
Yeah.
And they obviously, as you mentioned, they have to. Uh, they don't seek out recognition, but if recognition is due, it happens. But at the same time, it's important for them to recognize what others are doing, and
Yeah.
that becomes highly important. If they are under pressure, they have to stay calm, but they are calm, they are not emotionless. And that's
Mhm.
how you differentiate the two. As to when people reach out to you with their problems, you don't panic, you stay calm, you do help them out, but you're not robotic in nature. And that's what makes you approachable.
Yeah.
And I think the best one out of all of this is they are competitive, but they are at the same time gracious losers. Like when failure happens, they accept it. And that's the whole idea of extreme ownership. And I think like these multiple aspects of dichotomy is
Mm.
what makes a good leader, is to say that you have nothing to prove, but at the same time you have everything to prove. And that's the idea of dichotomy of leadership. And I think we saw this in a few principles also. So principle 1 obviously says extreme ownership, so you own everything. But
Mhm.
then principle 8 talks about decentralized command, which is quite opposite of what you're trying to do. So you're losing command over there, but that is necessary because that's how your team actually progresses. And one of the examples I can so clearly see in the current state of pandemic where we are. So let's say you have the central government and you have the state government,
Mhm.
and the state government has a lot of freedom to decide how they are going to resolve this pandemic and how they are going to address certain things. At the same time, the central government can override things when needed. So the central government can possibly lock down the complete country, which overrides what the state government is going to do. But the state government still has certain aspects of it. Now, one may see this as being very authoritative in nature. Not really. This is to say that you're close to your subordinates, but you still have to make everyone believe who's in charge. It is still an accountability of someone in the central government to take care of the larger scheme of things. And that's where, even if the state governments do not like the things, or even I personally, I do not like every decision that has been taken with regards to the pandemic,
Mhm.
but since it has been taken by someone who possibly has more information than me, I'll just be extreme and be a good follower, and I'll just go with it, because that moving together is going to solve the problems much faster than having a lot of dissections into what we are trying to do. And
Absolutely.
that's extreme, and that is basically principle number 12, the dichotomy of leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of liked the term in this whole explanation of principle number 12. I liked the term called gracious loser. It it is so important. Like you again in the principle number 11, you mentioned fail to learn to fail. and
Yeah,
gracious loser. So what we're essentially revolving around, not really around negativity, but what we're saying is start embracing the failures as much as you want to embrace the success later on. Because if you
absolutely.
don't do that now, eventually you will be in for a bigger failure. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't think you can handle that. You'd rather handle it at the initial phase and be a gracious loser, and start tasting those success as and when you incrementally work through these extreme ownership achievement principles. That's what I call it.
Yep, absolutely. So, with that, we
Mhm.
come to the end of all the principles of extreme ownership, so 12 principles, which also brings us towards the end of the show. And yeah, I'm just hoping that the listeners got a lot of stuff out of this show and it was educational for everyone. But thank you so much, Shri, for being a part of this. If I may ask your parting thoughts, that will be great.
Absolutely, Vishal. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation today. I mean, absolutely, there were some light bulb moments for myself as well. And it really touched upon this conversation of ours, touched upon so many important aspects of leadership today. And also, we know so many overlapping patterns between these 12 achievement principles of extreme ownership and in my case, we work as an agile I work as an agile coach, so I predominantly look back what is the overlap between these principles and our agile manifestos of values and principles. So I can see a lot of overlapping patterns here. So it's definitely going to be a good takeaway for me to kind of start implementing a few of these already, and see if I can really get reap the benefits out of these extreme ownership ways of mentioning everyone's a leader. It's not just me, not just you as a scrum master, agile coach, or a CEO, or a frontline factory worker. Everyone's a leader.
Absolutely.
And thank you
Everyone's
so
leader.
much again for this opportunity, Vishal. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I want to have a specific mention here, specific mention made. When you talk about enterprise joy, you usually bring in a caption called "Educating organizations to be awesome." I really love that caption or a tagline, because organizations are formed by people, and when you start making people feel awesome by educating them, that's when your organizations are automatically awesome. So I totally am in love with that tagline of yours, which said educating organizations to be awesome as part of enterprise joy. I really loved it.
Cool. Thank you so much for being a part of this episode. It was truly an honor for me. Thanks a lot.
Fantastic. Cheers,
Right.
Vishal.
Cheers. That was Extreme Ownership. Hope this episode was educational for you. Do look up for Agile Amigo to get in touch with Sriharsha and follow the awesome work that he's been doing in the Agile space. I'll leave a link to his profile and references from today's talk in the show description. For more of Enterprise Joy, subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube so you don't miss any episode. Patrons on patreon.com/enterprisejoy get some exclusive benefits, so do check out what we have to offer. The details of our upcoming episodes can be found on our website, enterprisejoy.com, and you can send your feedback and comments to vishal@enterprisejoy.com so our podcast can continuously improve. So until next time, thank you for listening to the Enterprise Joy podcast. Take care and stay safe.